thank you for inviting me here today. It's been a lot of fun, and I've enjoyed and learned a lot from the program we've had this morning. I do want to say that I can't tell you, I mean, I don't know how many of you remember the old Virginia Slims ad about "You've come a long way, baby." But I'm telling you, women in ag have come a long way. When I first started in the late 1970s, back when there was a soil conservation service, I would go to meetings and there would not be women there. And to begin with, you know, and KLA meetings, it was always interesting because there was usually the president, the cowbells, and me. And these were at board meetings. But to come to a meeting and have NRCS people and bankers and the forestry people, just women all across the whole range is just amazing to me and exciting. So I don't know, I just wanted to mention that because I think we really have come a long way in agriculture, and it's good to see. And I think we're stronger because of it. So I will tell you that I consider myself the luckiest person in the world because I live in the middle of a pasture in the heart of the Flint Hills. And I call it the Republic of Grass. So a little bit of background on the Republic. The four major grass species in the Flint Hills are the big blue stem, little blue stem, Indian grass, and switchgrass. Undisturbed prairie, that prairie that has not seen a plow, may have over 400 different types of plants, 40 to 60 of which native grasses, over 240 species of birds, many of those are migratory, 45 species of mammals, 43 different species of reptiles, and 12 amphibians, and butterflies, bees, and other flying and crawling insects too numerous to count. Sadly, for many of us, that information is far removed from our interactions with the prairie because we're the farmers and the ranchers who make our living here. We get totally focused on beef or corn or soybeans or a hay crop. We forget to listen for prairie chickens on a booming ground when we're more concerned about where that heifer's gone to have a calf. Or we cuss the flint and limestone when we break a section in the swamp. I've had to remind myself that the National Park Service thinks the Flint Hills are important enough to have a presence here with the Tallgrass Prairie National Preserve. My ranch is just as important as that preserve. The flora and fauna are nearly identical, and my job is to be a steward of that ecosystem. Most likely, my life as a multi-generational rancher is like many of yours. However, I have had some interesting side trips along the way, not the least of which is this microphone. It is through these side trips I've learned to embrace the prairie as something more significant than a pasture for cattle. My ranching career began in 1977. My father had encouraged me to read Atlas Shrugged while I attended a small Nazarene college in Idaho. I did, and I was really impressed with Dagny Taggart, the heroine of the book, who ran a railroad. I knew there wasn't a railroad in my future, but I could run a ranch if I'd return to Kansas. So I quit mid-quarter and came back home. So although I grew up and attended school in Chase County, my first years of ranching were spent in the Red Hills of south central Kansas. I had my own cows on land rented from my dad, and I helped with some of the work on his ranch as well. But I missed Chase County. When I found an ad in Grass and Grain for some pasture near Matfield Green, I talked my sister into joining me to buy that property, and I moved my herd home. Imagine our surprise when that property's abstracts revealed that our great-grandparents, Emma and Ezra Beadle, had homesteaded that land. They had sold it in 1915 and moved to the Zod. Even today, at this very moment, I get goosebumps when I tell this story. I named my ranch Homestead Ranch to reflect my return to the family homestead. Ever since I moved back to Chase County, my life has been an evolution from a livestock producer to a grass manager, and it's happened because of the people I've met along the way. As sometimes happens in families, my dad and I had some very difficult years. years when we hardly spoke to each other. I grew up on a ranch, and one of my dad's favorite sayings in response to when I thought he should do something was, "You run your ranch and I'll run mine." I'm embarrassed to admit I even said it to him a few times. Thankfully, my dad lived to be nearly 92 years old, and we had plenty of time to talk this over and patch things up. What happened, though, was that since I wasn't going to do everything his way, how was I going to do it? I went to every K-State or Kansas Livestock Association meeting I could for the first years of my ranching career, and I worked with the Soil Conservation Service. That dates me, I realize. My local DC at the time and the state range conservationists were instrumental in my understanding that grass was more important than cattle. Somehow their words have hung with me, even at times when I veered off the path. For example, in the early 1990s, I started a program called Prairie Women Adventures in Retreat. The goals of the program were education, empowerment, and environment. We were much more about adventures, though, than we were about retreats, as the program was established to allow women the opportunity to share in our ranch year, calving, branding, and weaning, with some farm work thrown in occasionally. Now, mind you, this program was set up, they were paying me to come do my work. I mean, this is Tom Sawyer all the way. But I felt this program would be an important connection with the beef consumer. So for nearly 10 years, every calf on my ranch that received a vaccination also received an apology. Big syringe, give them a shot, say, "I'm sorry." Most folks today are 3 to 5 generations removed from the experiences of farm life. I think that American farmers and ranchers are incredible producers of food, thanks to our land-grant universities. But I also think we sometimes fall short in our ability to communicate with our consumers. My Prairie Women program gave me an important connection with the beef consumer, an opportunity to share how beef calves are raised, and to be able to answer questions about how those calves are handled. Even today, food safety and animal welfare are major issues. These women, which I've always called Prairie Women, were the ones who helped me to see what a wonderful place the Flint Hills are. Countless times we'd be loading up branding irons, syringes, etc., and someone would say, "Hey, look at that sunset, it's beautiful." And I would be thinking, "That sunset means it's getting dark, let's get this stuff loaded." But they insisted. So I learned that although I thought it was a ranch, they thought it was one of the most beautiful landscapes they'd ever seen. 2.5 hours from Kansas City, but it might as well be a million miles. Having Prairie Women at the ranch meant one of my needs too. I wanted to know about the world out there. I wanted to learn what their lives were like in cities across America. Amazingly, women came from New York to California, and so I did learn a lot from them. And some of them continue to visit, and they continue to help. At the time, there was no real public access to the Flint Hills. This was before the Tallgrass Prairie National Preserve, and I was glad for the chance to show the Flint Hills as a working landscape. It became a win-win experience. My guests taught me to slow down and see what they appreciated, even as I was teaching them about ranching. People will preserve what they love. I finally figured out that taking a group of Prairie Women on a sunset drive in the bed of a grain truck with a glass of champagne was just about the perfect end to working cattle. The other impact that the Prairie Women Adventures program had was in making me a better producer. I won't forget the day 2 Prairie women, who just happened to be microbiologists, asked me when caramelization occurs in silage, and I didn't know the answer. I told you I went to a Nazarene school, not K-State. I was asked thousands of questions, some of them 100 times, and my Prairie women wanted an answer. Saying I did something a certain way, because we've always done it this way, wasn't going to cut it. I needed to know why I had chosen the production practices I had, so I did the research. I veered off a bit again in 1994 when we did the Symphony on the Prairie. This was when my vision really shifted from seeing a working landscape to seeing it as an endangered ecosystem. When I saw several thousand people enjoying themselves on the hillside in my hay meadow, listening to an orchestra, I had a totally new appreciation for the landscape. I saw my ranch and the Flint Hills through new eyes. To me, the hills have always been alive with music, birds, thunderstorms, the wind. The dream of a concert evolved from my enjoyment of classical music, from knowing how much my urban friends loved to come visit the ranch, and from knowing my ranching community might never take the opportunity to hear an orchestra. After the concert, a friend who ranches in South Dakota said to me, "Jane, you've given me a new appreciation for my own grasslands at home." I realized at that moment that we ranchers could see things differently, and that we could find an appreciation for our ranches, our working landscapes, in ways other than our daily routine. I veered off yet again with where and how I live. I live in a hay-bale house in the middle of one of my pastures. When I decided to build, friends of mine who had built a straw bale house in the state of Washington told me I could build my own house. I said, "No, I can pull a calf, but I can't build a house." What I learned, though, is that it's not about building a house. It's about knowing the language. You see, today, if I would tell you, no matter what you do for a living, you can build your own house. You just need to learn the language. We have to remember that whenever we feel we can't do something, we need to learn the language. The house was built in 2000 and 2001 and has 255 small prairie hay bales in the outside walls. Actually, prairie hay bales that I baled myself because I knew how to run the baler, and I could make full bales or half bales or quarter bales and get them to all wedge in just right. We deconstructed a barn near Matfield Green and recycled the lumber into the house. The house has a composting toilet, gray water garden tank, and solar hot water for radiant floor heating. It's off the grid with my electricity provided by solar panels and a small wind turbine. I wanted to live as independently as Emma and Ezra Beadle had when they homesteaded. But let me assure you, I wanted the bathroom inside, and I wanted all the hot water I could get. It's been one of the most amazing experiments of my life. Sure, there's always a day or two, maybe 3 or 4, when I wonder if I'm crazy. But on the other 360 plus days, I know I have the best little house on the prairie. Now I feel that this expression was used earlier and I kind of cringed because I feel like I went over to the dark side last year when I added a whole house generator. But I'm not tough enough to do a summer without an air conditioner. And with all due respect to Ashley, there isn't a tree within a half a mile of my house. I am literally out in the open on the south side of the hill. The generator is powered by propane, and for the first time in 15 years, I don't have to go out and start a portable generator when my lights go out. Because with the whole house generator, the lights stay on. If the batteries get reduced to 50%, the generator just automatically comes on. The last time I veered off course a little was in 2004, when I began a burning experience that further changed my rancher outlook. I began to realize that by focusing on cattle as my bottom line, I was selling out diversity to make a profit, that I was potentially sacrificing the integrity of my ecosystem for the sake of a commodity. I knew it was time to start thinking outside the cow. The burning experiment is called patch burning, and the idea is to burn 1/3 of the pasture each year, so that in a 3-year span, the entire pasture is burned once. I often wish it had the name 2 years of rest for 2/3 of the pasture, because that is really one of the most important parts of this type of burning. Giving the pasture time to recover, and getting a hot enough fire, because you've got an increased fuel load, to burn what you really want to burn and do some good with trees and woody species. By leaving 2/3 of the pasture, we create a variety of habitats. Heavily grazed areas that the plovers and the killdeer love. That would be the 1/3 that is in the current burn sector, where the cattle spend 75% of their time. The cattle will return to the area that was burned the previous year for the rest of their grazing. The sector that was burned 2 years ago provides incredible nesting habitat for the greater prairie chicken, meadowlarks, Henslow sparrows, and wonderful loafing areas for cattle or calving areas for the cows. If you are a gardener, it's not hard to imagine that I'm getting greater use of rains that fall on the areas that have grass cover from the last 2 years. I mean, mulch is mulch. Some of the results of patch burning that I'm really pleased with are that we did the traditional gains, that we have increased pollinators, increased plant diversity, trailing recovery, and added fuel loads through woody species control. Although the experiment was not scientific in design, we knew we needed some ways to measure our successes and our failures. Our monitoring systems included photo points in each sector, butterfly surveys, and bird surveys. I was in my pastures many times identifying grasses and forbs and birds and butterflies. In general, becoming much more acquainted with the tallgrass prairie residents, not always given much attention by ranchers. Since we started this experiment, I've been delighted to see forbs growing in my pastures again that I had only seen in ungrazed road ditches. And it was amazing to find 57 different species of butterflies on the ranch, including the regal fritillary, a tallgrass prairie specialist. 5 of the butterfly species we found are in danger of disappearing from prairies as more prairies become cropland and more of it's developed and more host plants and cover are lost due to overgrazing and undergrazing and overuse and underuse of fire. If the smaller animals and insects are doing okay, the Big Macs are too. But I do want to say after the house and the patch burning that I am not an environmental zealot. I get a kick out of jackrabbits. So one day I said to my friend with U.S. Fish and Wildlife, you know, I'd do something to enhance jackrabbit habitat. And he said, Jane, jackrabbits really like drought. And I said, the hell with the jackrabbits. I mean, you know, we're not doing drought. So all these things have to be done with a little bit of balance. I have a small herd of cows. I've sold the bigger part. I'm trying, you know, the average age of farmers and ranchers is 58 years, and I've sort of overachieved that by 5, so I'm trying to work on a succession plan, but I still have a small herd of cows there. We do stockers as well. My cow herd looks like something from the United Nations. I have a few red ones and a few black ones and a few Brahmas and a zebu, and the Watusi just died a couple of years ago. But we calve in May and June, not the traditional February-March timeline, and this change was made about 15 years ago when someone asked me, if you believe you're a grazer and your cow is your means of harvesting your crop, which is the grass, why are you having her highest nutritional needs when your grass is at its lowest nutritional output? Why indeed? I couldn't come up with a good answer for that. So I changed my calving to where the cow can more easily do it on her own. Less feed, less expense, less time out in the cold. What's wrong with that? The first time I pulled a calf in short sleeves and tennis shoes instead of Carhartts and heavy boots, I was completely sold on the change. A side perk has been that for reasons unknown but shared by other late spring calvers, we have fewer calving difficulties. It is so much nicer to ride out on the gator in the morning and the evening to check cows than in a four-wheel drive truck. My dogs love it, and so do I. We also have nearly all our calves, about 80%, in 45 days, which means that we are incredibly busy for 6 weeks, but then we're done with it. We had 9 calves in one day this spring, and it was a long day. Because the cows' nutritional needs are coming when the grass is coming on as well, we don't have to feed nearly as much hay. In fact, we've gone some winters without feeding any to our older cows. Obviously, growing heifers still need some. By supplementing with protein, the cows can utilize the old grass enough for the nutritional requirements for the stage of gestation they are in. Probably the single most important thing I've learned is that I don't just live in the middle of a pasture. I live in the middle of a dynamic ecosystem, so it's really important to keep asking the difficult questions about what impact I'm having on the prairie. Am I being a good steward of the land? If my great-grandfather Beagle were to see the land he homesteaded today, would he recognize it?